Hello, everybody. We are ready to get started. It's the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for joining today, wherever you are in the world. We're so delighted to have you in these interesting times that we're facing, and we're so glad to be delivering continual content to all of you. My name is Jennifer Morris. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at Madcap Software. Joining me today is Neil Perlin, certified Flare trainer and consultant and president of Hyperword Services, his consultancy firm based in Massachusetts. Neil's a frequent educator at various industry conferences, including MadWorld, which is Madcap's annual user conference. And I'm so happy to have him join us today. So welcome, Neil. Thanks for attending. Today, Neil's going to talk about context-sensitive help, or CSH, as we often call it, and responsive design. These are two techniques that have been around for some time. Now, CSH is a technique that's been around since perhaps the early to mid 90s, so it's a bit more seasoned than responsive design, which really came about in around 2004-ish, when consuming content on smaller screens like tablets and phones became an important consideration. And this idea of how we write and manage content for our mobile world means we can explore new models for contextualization and responsiveness, including being responsive to inputs coming coming into from the physical world, actually, and not just from the computer itself. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's really interesting stuff. Now, as always, we have a lot to cover. So I want to just remind everybody, 2 quick items of business before we begin. For one, we will be recording this session, so everybody will get a link to the recording when it's done. Also, there is a question panel in the GoToWebinar console. Hopefully you can all see that. This is a great place to post questions throughout the webinar. We're going to do our best to get to as many, or hopefully all, that come in at the end. Whatever we don't get to, we'll send out a question and answer document to everybody, so you have that as a reference. So again, Neil, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. I know you have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to go ahead and turn everything over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Jen. Quick sound check. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3. Am I coming in clearly?
You sound loud and clear on this end. If anybody wants to practice using that question panel, go ahead and give the high sign. It looks like we've got some affirmations that we're all good to go. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to this session. Briefly, who am I? Looking at the names, I know a lot of you, have met a lot of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I have been working in tech comm since COF 79, working in hypertext since 86. So I created the world's second and third online help systems. One of them, just to give people a cheap laugh, was the user's guide to MS-DOS 2.1. So I've been doing this for a while. I am certified in Flare, in Madcap Flare, Madcap Mimic, an unrelated tool called VisiApps, which is a mobile app development tool. And basically, I've been doing this for a while. So with that, let me jump right in to what I want to talk about, which is contextualization today and tomorrow. So what I want to do is quickly review the state of contextualization today, and that's going to be 2 things. It's going to be context-sensitive help, or CSH, as Jen mentioned, and the other one is going to be responsive design. And these are both very well, context sensitivity is certainly mature. Responsive design is still advancing, but it's mature in that it's been with us for at least a decade. But the thing that those two have in common is that they respond to contexts coming from within the computer. The third thing that I want to show is how to respond to contexts coming from outside the computer, coming from the physical world. Bear with me. So today, 2 forms of contextualization, as I said, CSH, context-sensitive help, and responsive design and content. So first of all, CSH, what this does is it simply ties online help to whatever app screen the user happens to be looking at. So if the user is on the print dialog box for whatever application you support, and they have a question, there hopefully will be a help button on that dialog box. The user clicks it, and hopefully the correct help topic shows up, answers their questions. So that's great. You do have to be careful when you use the word context, I'll add, depending on who you're talking to, because the word context to different people means different things. I was the Society for Technical Communications lead representative to the World Wide Web Consortium from between 2003 and 2006. And I was in one meeting that was happily discussing context, and they didn't say a thing about the kind of context we in TechCom do. So I mentioned it to the organizer at the coffee break, and he carved out 15 minutes out of the session to let me stand up and give an overview of context from the TechCom perspective. So you have to be careful who you're talking to make sure that you're talking about the same thing. So that digression aside, CSH is controlled by header and alias files or some other way, and I left that deliberately nebulous. I'll come back to that. But here's the model. So on the left, we have the header file. On the right, we have the alias file. And what's going on? Well, what happens is that when your engineers create the application, they will give a particular ID to each screen. And this would be the right-hand column in the header, 1000, 1001, and so on. And then there's an ID, the help ID, in the left-hand column. So new one, new two. And then that pound define is just a piece of code that automatically gets added. You can ignore it. On the right is the alias file. And if you look at this, this repeats the ID, new one, new two, and so on. So what happens when the user actually uses this? Well, let's say that they're in the widgets dialog box and they press the help button. So the first thing the help system does is it figures out what the ID is for the widgets dialog box, and let's say it's 1005. And then it jumps to the left column to find the corresponding help ID, which is new 5. Hang on a second. I see a couple of people are having some audio problems. Are we okay now? 1, 2, 3. Can you folks hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it jumps and it finds that the corresponding help topic ID is new 5. And then it jumps into the alias table, runs down the left-hand column until it finds new 5, looks to the right, and it says, aha, this is the topic to display in response to the user's request for help, starting the find utility.htm. So it sounds like sort of a number of hoops to go through, and there's some history behind this, but basically, conceptually, it's pretty simple. And we used to do this in Notepad. I used to type, in the early days, I typed hundreds or thousands of lines to set up context-sensitive help, which is just not as much fun as you'd think. And fortunately, the process is now becoming GUI driven. And what you're seeing here is the Flare alias editor, which, without going into detail, lets you add the information needed to fill out both columns. And much of that information is done automatically. So it simplifies the process tremendously. All right, and then, as I said, there's the some other way of doing it. And that is whatever model, whatever approach your engineers have cooked up. And I find that Flare is very good at handling any of these proprietary models. The one drawback potentially is that you will or may have to go into code. In other words, depending on how far the engineer's approach deviated from the standard GUI approach that Flare supports, you may have to go into code. It's not that difficult. It's just largely tedious. But again, without going into too much more detail on this, let me turn again to responsive. And here, the context is not what screen you're on the computer, but rather what are the properties of the device on which your material is being displayed. So, and it can tie the skin, it can tie the layout of the content. In other words, let's say you have 3 graphics that display in a row on a large screen, but when you go to a tablet or when you go to a phone, you want that to switch to a vertical format. And this can happen automatically. This can even change the wording depending on the device. For example, on a big screen, on a desktop, you would say, click the button, but you could change this to automatically to read, tap the button when you go to a tablet or a phone. And the context, as I say, can vary depending on all kinds of properties of the display device, screen size, or maybe there's no screen. If any of you are joggers, for example, you may be using a phone with Eliza or Siri on a Velcro strap on your upper arm. And the context has to vary because of that. Or it could be device resolution. It could be the form factor. In other words, what's the shape of the screen? It could be the orientation. Are you holding the screen on your cell phone vertically or horizontally? Is it a color device versus black and white? And a bunch of other characteristics that I can't quite remember at the moment, but the point being, there's a tremendous amount of flexibility. Mostly what we use is screen size, but it doesn't have to, it's not limited to that. But here's an example, and this is somewhat old. This is a website from Gatwick Airport in London. This is probably about 4 or 5 years old. I just still use it because it's cute and I like it, and it illustrates the whole process well. So if you look at this up along the top, there's your main menu at the airport, flight information, to and from, parking, etc. And there's a cute picture and another picture and then a third picture. So there's a lot going on here. That's desktop. This is tablet. And at first glance, it doesn't look any different, except you notice there's less space over on the right-hand side of the screen. And you notice also that that horizontal menu is now gone. And it's been replaced in the upper left corner by this little 3-line box called a flyout, otherwise often referred to as the hamburger. And this has taken place automatically. And then if I run this on a phone, we go to this. And again, most of the information is now gone, hidden. It's either gone or it's hidden. We still have the flyout, and the interface has changed to show the most important things. And we assume in this case, what you're most interested in is arrival time and departure time. But the point is, this all happens automatically. This gets revised, reformatted automatically. So it's run without going into too much detail. It's run by mediums, Flare, or technically media queries. And for those of you who are comfortable working inside the code in a CSS file, if you define any mediums through Flare's style sheet editor, these are actually media queries, and you'll see them indicated by an @media. So it might be @media tablet, @media phone. And so what it would do is let you say the default setting for, let's say, a head 1 is 16 point. But then down near the bottom, there would be an @media section of the style sheet that said heading 1, 14 point. And then maybe there'd be another one further down, @media phone, that says heading 1, 11 point. So what's happening is that the browser is falling through, processing its way through the style sheet. And depending on what kind of media your material is being displayed on, it will read the appropriate code and run those properties. So for example, again, media queries specify the display properties. Here's a fairly simple example. At media screen and min width 481 pixels and max width 650 in English. What this means is that if a particular display device has a screen, which sounds like a given, but again, it doesn't have to be if you have one of those Velcroed cell phone that you're talking to while you jog. But if this device has a screen and is between 481 and 650 pixels wide, the material will take on specific formats peculiar to that setting. So very flexible. And once again, we used to do this by hand in Notepad. You notice this is kind of a theme here. And it is again becoming GUIfied. So here is the HTML5 skin editor in a recent version of Flare. This hasn't changed that much. And what's nice about this is over on the right, obviously that's a preview of what your output will look like. Over on the left is all the different commands. And then up at the top, you can see I have web medium. Selected web medium is basically desktop, and then tablet, and then mobile. So this would let you say, okay, I want to change the header, I want to change the logo. So fine, the logo is the Madcap software logo on the black background. I want to change the logo, and sure enough, in the header group on the left, second one down is logo. Open that up, here's your properties. It works very well. Tremendous amount you can do here. Hang on a second. Sorry about that, just clearing my throat. One of the problems with this, if you're new to it, is what if you want to set some item that's not as easy to find in the list of properties on the left? And in the beginning, it was easy to get confused and just sort of scroll your way up and down, trying to find that one setting. And Madcap added this really slick feature up on the menu toward the right-hand side. It says highlight. And if you click that option, any option that you hover over and click on in the preview on the right will automatically expand the appropriate codes on the left. So it actually takes you right to where you want to be. It's tremendously useful. It made the process a lot easier. So again, this is becoming GUIfied. Also, if I come back here, this is the responsive layout editor. And what this does is it allows you to make the layout responsive, which is sort of a nice circular definition. But you notice here, I have two sets of three graphics. Horizontal, the first one is in a table, and that's fine. If I display this material on a desktop, it looks fine. If I display it on a tablet, it probably will look fine. If I display it on a phone, it's probably not, because I have forced horizontal scrolling. At the bottom is the grid, and this is where you can specify that if the screen is a certain width, show all three graphics horizontally. If the screen shrinks to a smaller width, maybe move the right-hand one down below cell 1. And if the screen gets really small, change them to a completely vertical format. And some of the concepts here, if you're new to this, can be a little confusing at first. Like, we're talking about columns, but columns here don't mean the same thing as they do in the real world. But once you get that idea across, it's pretty simple, pretty flexible, and very useful if you create any material that's going to be displayed on anything other than a desktop. So, all right, that is context sensitivity, to use the term broadly as we know it today, dating, as Jennifer said, for CSH back to the early mid-90s. I don't remember exactly when it showed up. I do remember doing context sensitive help in 1995 by hand in Notepad. And I was doing responsive design by hand in Notepad probably around 08 or 09. So these have been around for a while. They're battle tested, they work fine. But they do have one problem or one limitation, which is that the context is based on coming from within the computer. In other words, what screen in the application am I on? Or what size device am I on? But what we have here is something new. And this is how to drive contextualization with prompts coming from outside the computer, coming from the real world or the physical world. And there are many types of contextualization here. I mentioned an organization here called Information 4.0, which was in a group called the Information 4.0 Consortium. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but this was a group that was put together in Europe, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, with the idea of driving information, online content to the next level, whatever that is. And I won't go into detail here as to everything that's involved, because it's simultaneously pretty cool and potentially pretty complex. But, and by the way, the organization, the Information 4.0 Consortium, has closed down and it's being rebuilt in a different form. So if you're interested in this, if any of you are from Europe and want to look into this, or if you've heard me speak about this, do a Google search. If you can't find it, email me. All that said, what other kinds of contextualization might we be talking about? Well, again, simple, device orientation. Which way are you holding the device? Portrait mode or landscape mode? And what effect would that have on how the information is presented? Location, GPS or beacon-based. GPS is typically outdoors. Beaconing is typically indoors, comes from Apple. External states, temperature or pressure. Do we need to monitor temperature for a possible rise in temperatures, let's say due to a fire or to a broken air conditioner? Pressure. Maybe we have a gas line that's broken or an air line that's broken, and the pressure in the engine room is starting to go up for some inexplicable reason. We need to modify the information. In fact, I'll back up one and I'll say, as far as temperature is concerned, those of you who've heard me speak on and off over about the last decade know that one of my examples is, in fact, an example that I'm very fond of, is having an aircraft pre-flight reference manual that could automatically revise itself based on the external temperature, let's say above or below freezing. And that's exactly the model, the example that I'm going to demonstrate. Environmental states, again, do we have smoke? Do we have gas? Do we have flame? Material states. I've only run into a few people who needed to do this, but the ones who did needed to do this really badly. And there's a guy I know from the STC who works for a company that supplies equipment to oil drilling rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico. And they have to keep track of metal strain or metal fatigue in things like drill pipe. And they have to track it so that they know when to haul the pipe up to switch out a pipe or switch out a drill head before it fails. So the material state there is very important. Chronological states. One of the examples that I've always used is I'd like to have an app that knows where I am. And maybe it knows that I'm in a museum. And it knows what day it is. It knows that it's Friday. And maybe it knows what time it is. and it knows that it's 11:30, and it knows that it could signal me to say, hey, Neil, you're in the museum on Friday at 11:30, and the cafeteria is having a special on barbecue or something. So chronology. And it could be something else. I'm sure I've forgotten something or overlooked something. And in fact, if I have, I would love to hear about it from you, because I just find this subject almost endlessly expandable. But that said, this is what I'd like to do. So, great, how does this work? What is the equivalent to what we do today? And that's what I want to show. So we're at a very early academic research stage. The example that I'm going to show you is the first working example that I know of. I put this together several months ago, and I showed it to a couple of the nice folks at MadCap who looked at what I did and actually streamlined it a bit. So I do want to give credit where credit is due and thank them. But the academic research is going off in all kinds of interesting directions. I'll point to one that I found particularly useful from Professor Stefan Sigg, who I believe is at a university in Finland, in Aalto. Anybody from Europe, correct me if I got the country wrong. But he gave a very good presentation talking about ambient intelligence. How do we define intelligence in a machine sense, and how do we work with it? Excellent presentation. I will warn you, there's some language in a few of the slides, just to be aware of. But that said, so how does this work? Well, conceptually, since we like graphics, so I have a graphic. We have a sensor. The sensor collects data, sends it somewhere, which gets processed, and the processed data affects the documentation somehow. So, okay, fair enough. In reality, perhaps, well, we have sensors. We have temperature sensors. And in fact, since I can't really see any response, and I don't want to go off to check, but if anybody in the audience is a maker, belongs to any maker spaces, or does any maker type stuff, which is actually a lot of fun. There's a book that I'd recommend called Make Sensors that comes from Maker Media. It's about 6 years old, but it's a very good introduction to an overview of sensors, temperature sensors, pressure sensors, atmospheric gas sensors, and so on. But the point is, we have sensors enough so that amateur engineers like me can actually build things with them. So the sensor collects data, in this case temperature. That data gets sent to a file on a PC. Let's say it's FTP'd. How that happens is sort of a black box. But then here's a crucial step. The JavaScript has to take, some JavaScript has to take that data and convert it to some project control file that actually controls the regeneration. So, and again, if you know JavaScript, this is not a particularly difficult task. If you don't know JavaScript, you can grab one of your engineers and they can do it. So, first time I mentioned this to somebody, and this was pretty much the reaction I got, like, you're serious? Really, this is all doable today. Sensor reads, data delivery, absolutely. JavaScript, absolutely. It's very straightforward, except for one problem, which is that the authoring tool has to rebuild the output. In other words, I could easily have an online aircraft service manual and have it change, depending on whether the temperature is above or below freezing, but the authoring tool has to rebuild the output. So build speed and the amount of memory that you have in your computer are absolutely crucial. And anything you can do to increase build speed is to the good. But still, if I ask for some information based on, hey, what's the temperature outside? And you tell me that I have to wait for 30 seconds or 60 seconds or 5 minutes, I'm not going to be very happy. Technically, it's not a problem, but if I'm the user, I don't want to wait for the new build. And there's a good chance that I'll just say, well, the heck with this, and go to the version of the documentation that I have, which may not be accurate. And the other problem from a usability standpoint is that the users have to know that there's a new build coming. Plus, there's a delivery time estimate. In other words, if I just say, show me the information, and the computer has to regenerate the information based on whatever sensor data I send it, it has to send the user a message that says, hey, we're building the new version, hang on for about 5 minutes or 30 seconds or something. And I see somebody has a comment here. I think, what if the user can't wait 5 minutes? Yep, absolutely right. What if it's the emergency response manual and the radiation alarms are going off or somebody is dying or something? Obviously, they don't want to wait. So, which brings me to my question, is there a way to update the material without a full rebuild, as opposed to having to wait and rebuild it based on external data, of course. And I'm very fond of this cartoon. Many of you have probably seen it. You should be more explicit here in step 2, where it says, and then a miracle occurs. And no miracles. You can do this today in Flare. And here's my example. So this is a little demo project. It's got one topic in it. And again, the idea is this is an aircraft pre-flight manual. And the two crucial issues, or the one crucial issue here, is what's the temperature? In other words, do we need to de-ice or do we not need to de-ice? And this is going to be based on outside temperature. So I have one topic. I have the material conditionalized. And two conditions, one is 30 degrees, the other one is 40 degrees. And some of you are probably thinking, well, that's great, but what about 39 degrees? What about 31 degrees? And you're right, hold that thought. And for those of you from Canada, you may be thinking, wait a minute, if it's 30 degrees, we don't need to de-ice. And that's actually an issue, which I'll get to in a few slides. It also has one set of conditional build tags, 30 and 40. And here's the crucial thing. It has 3 CSSs. So over on the left is the main CSS. And this is doing things like setting the font family, the body font family is Arial, which means everything will be Arial. Head 1 is bold, 24 point, and so on. But the crucial thing is up at the top, the 2 imports. And we're importing 2 subsidiary CSSs called hide and show. So here on the upper right is hide. And what this says is hide everything. You see, display set to none for all material, whether it's using condition temp 30 or temp 40, hide it all. But then as the browser drops through the CSS, it comes to the second one, show. And that's the one on the lower right. So the hide says hide everything. The second one says except or unless the temperature is 30 degrees, in which case display that. So the second one, show, overrides the first one. And how does this all work? Well, this is basically what I just said. So the result is this. If the outside temperature is, let's say, 30 degrees, this is the output. So it says, follow these steps to pre-flight the aircraft, 30 degrees de-ice. If the outside temperature changes to 40, the output changes to this, de-icing not necessary. So that's great. Problem is, I don't want to have to wait 5 minutes for this information. when I'm on the flight line. So let me show you, give you a quick demo here. So here, where's my topic? Right here, here's my topic. All right, and over here in Notepad, this is the show CSS. And you notice it says temp 40. So what happens is, let's say the sensor detects the outside temperature, and it says, hey, it's 30 degrees out. It sends that information to the computer where it's grabbed by the JavaScript, which processes it and either takes the temperature and simply plugs it into this line, or maybe it just creates this entire CSS, just recreates it. But let's say it's 30 degrees. So the JavaScript has specified that it's 30 degrees. I'll do a save, and then I'll come over and I'll do a refresh. And look what happened. The material changed on the fly. Let me go back and show this again. Nope, turns out it's 40 degrees. Okay, no problem. I do a save. That data comes in from the sensor. The JavaScript reads it, modifies the CSS, and then I come here and I do a refresh, and the material has refreshed itself. All right, the important thing here is that there's no rebuild time. Hang on a second, go back to presentation. There's no rebuild time. It's effectively instantaneous. It might not be quite that fast if it's coming through the network and you have heavy traffic loads on the network, but we're talking about a matter of seconds here. So the JavaScript is just reading the temperature, rewriting show, and then refreshing the browser. All right, did this make sense? Does everybody see what I did here? Again, the Madcap folks will send me any questions, and we should actually, at the rate this is going faster than I thought it would. We should have time for questions. But offhand, is anybody thinking this is really weird? Okay. Do we have problems? Actually, I can see some questions, but I can't quite see. It's actually very truncated. So, okay, Jen, when we stop for questions, you can help me expand the questions tab so I can actually see the questions. All I can see is one line right now.
Sure.
Okay, so anyhow, are there problems? Of course. Number one, the example is limited to 2 temperatures or 2 settings. Remember, it could be temperature, it could be air pressure, could be carbon monoxide levels, anything you want. So we'd be better off to use a condition for each temperature, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, etc. Except that gets kind of silly. So better still would be to create 2 different conditions, above freezing and below freezing, and then let the JavaScript do the math when it gets the actual temperature from the sensor. And I see somebody wrote something about because they use Celsius and you're stealing my thunder, but oh, yep. Let the JavaScript do the math. We want to keep it as simple as possible. And again, conceptually, this should work for any external sensor data being fed into the online documentation. So again, I won't go over what types of sensor data, but if anybody actually does see an immediate use for this, I would love to hear about it. And I'll make you marginally famous in my blog. So a couple of things here. The biggest thing is unit of measurement consistency. And whoever posted that comment about Celsius, bingo, what units of measurement are we talking about? Are we talking about pounds, imperial or metric, pounds or kilograms? Are we talking about degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius, imperial or metric? And some of these examples might sound a little far-fetched, but I'll give you two examples that illustrate the main problem of consistency beautifully. One of them is called the Gimli Glider, which those of you in Canada may remember. And then there's the Mars Climate Orbiter. So the Gimli Glider was an Air Canada 767 from Montreal to Edmonton in 1983. And when it was being refueled in Montreal, there were a series of unit errors made by the fueling crew. Yep, somebody commented the Hubble telescope. Yep, hold that thought. So basically, there was a units error made when it refueled, and it ran out of fuel over Manitoba. And this was actually a made-for-TV movie about 25 years ago. I recommend it highly because the flight crew had to glide in a Boeing 767 and land it on an abandoned RCAF fighter base in Gimli, Manitoba, while there was a drag race going on. And they did it. Nobody was hurt. You see the front nose gear collapsed, which actually helped because it slowed the plane down before it could plow into anybody. But this was just a simple confusion between imperial versus metric. The Mars Polar Lander. Again, this was a lander in 1999 that was going to land near, I forget if it was the north or south pole of Mars, to do geophysical research, and somebody goofed in the programming and they didn't convert cleanly from imperial to metric. And it's estimated that the lander hit at about 350 miles an hour. And there's actually been photos taken of the remains. And number 2 is a photo of the deployed parachute. And number 3 is this little black smear is what remains of the Mars Polar Lander. And there are many other examples as well. Somebody mentioned the Hubble telescope. Yeah, that was actually a little bit more complex, but it was an error of, I think, 2/1000ths of a millimeter in a measuring device, which just blew the whole thing up. And I will say, I actually know the guy who ground the corrective lenses. I'm proud to say. So some other things, where is this data going to come from? Is it going to come from external sensors? Obviously. But are those standalone sensors? Or are they going to be IoT, Internet of Things devices? And what effect might that have on your data? Another problem is, where will the sensors be placed? Because, and without bringing up any political issues here, one of the criticisms of a lot of climate change research has been the fact that a lot of the temperature sensors are on places like building roofs that are tarred and they retain heat, or they're placed in heat islands around cities. And the problem is that skews the data. So we'll have to work with the engineers to make sure that the data is placed realistically. And is that really our responsibility as technical communicators? Frankly, no, because most of us are not, we're not mechanical engineers or sensor engineers, but our roles have been widening a lot in recent years. And it's something somebody has to say, where are these sensors going to be placed? All right, I've often found myself in positions like that on projects. How will this affect our content design? Those of you who have been working with micro content in Flare 2019 might have seen that this may change your content design, because now you're not only creating topics and variables and snippets, but you're actually having to mark out sub-chunks of content for use as micro content. And now all of a sudden, we may have to conditionalize our micro content, et cetera, et cetera. And as projects get more and more complex, the need to document them becomes more and more complex. And as always, the unknown unknowns. Anytime there's a new technology, there's always going to be something that we don't know about that's going to cause trouble. All right, I have my horror stories. I'm sure you folks all do. And we know it's there. So that said, let me just sum this up. This is going to be a new area in TechCom. It may be a sub-area, because if you don't have to worry about data coming in from the real world, external sensor data, hopefully this has been interesting, but not really that useful. But if you, like my friend, deal with drill rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, this may be crucial. Plus, it's fun, which is always a big part. So briefly, this is me. And with that, let me turn the mic back over to Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks, and want to appreciate everybody's great questions coming in. Keep them coming. We're gonna turn our attention there in just a second. So just to remind everybody, with everything going on, we've decided to double down on the content we're producing for everyone, just to stay engaged and keep with the community. So this will go out to everybody. You can always find this on our website. Additional webinars coming up, additional introductory training classes coming up where you can register. So please have a look at that. Okay, so I think that was the last slide, Neil. So let's kind of turn our attention to some of the questions. And there was one really good one at the beginning, and I think it's kind of good to reiterate, but maybe you could just sort of rehash. So the question was, what do the default mobile and tablet mediums actually do, other than give us the option to choose them for a target? Are the media queries really the responsive mediums? Maybe you could kind of differentiate, because there's a lot of mediums and what's going on there.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Is there an echo?
Nope, you sound great.
Okay. All right. So let me, a second. I'm going to go into Flare. And okay, here's my, I'm going to open up my skins editor. Do you guys see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. So again, I'm in the skin editor in the styles pane right here. And again, here are the three mediums. So the web medium, tablet medium, mobile medium, this lets me specify how my material should look depending on which medium is in force. It doesn't say how does it decide which medium is in force, just which medium is in force. So we might say, for example, that for the web medium, my background, let's say, is going to be, with apologies, red. For the tablet, we'll say that the background should be green, sort of. And for mobile, the background should be some shade of blue, or whatever that is. So that's great. I've now said, if this material is being displayed on a desktop, go with the web medium settings, tablet, go with the tablet settings, but it's one output. So I've now said, this is what I want each element of the interface to look like, depending on the medium. Okay, that's cool. Problem is, how do I know what medium? I haven't defined medium yet. So I'm now in the target editor, and I'm on the skin tab. And you notice down at the bottom, it says tablet breakpoint 1279, mobile breakpoint 767. What this means is that if I'm on a desktop, come on. Okay, it's possible that my color choices may have gotten the computer upset.
Do a save.
There we go. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what happens is that I've now said if this is larger than, if my device size is 1,280 pixels or larger, go with the web medium settings, and you get this. If my display device size is between 768 pixels and 1279, go with the tablet medium. Go with the tablet medium settings. And if it's 767 or smaller, go with mobile. So this way I've defined what each one of these mediums should look like. And then I've told the computer, and this is how to define when you're at which medium should apply. Okay. So having said that, I'm going to go into the style sheet editor. So I'm going to go to the Content Explorer. I'm trying to move slowly because it's always irritating when a presenter just bounces around too fast. But here, no, I don't want to play with that one. I'll do this. I'll modify the main one, styles. So now I'm going to say that there's heading 1. And hang on a second. Okay, so I'm going to say that heading 1 should be, okay, 24-point bold. And you notice here, it says medium default. So this is now saying my default is 24-point bold. But then I'll say, okay, but for tablet, I want font size to be 16 point, and I want it to be red. And then I'll say for mobile, that's great, but I want it to be, and you notice it's still using the default because I haven't changed it yet. So I'll say for mobile, for the phone, I want it to be 12 point. And, oops, second, yeah, we'll say 14. And color, I decide I want green. So this is great. This now lets me say that, let me do a save. This now lets me say that, okay, there's my default. Here's my tablet setting. And here's my mobile setting. I could also define a print setting if I wanted. Nice feature also is that I could put a check mark in each medium that I want to display. And I can display them side by side for comparison. All right. So in other words, what happens is that there's different parts of Flare that come into play to allow you to specify what are the dividing lines or the breakpoints between when different mediums should take effect. And then how do we define individual properties for different mediums through the style sheet? How do we define the settings for the skin through the skin editor? And even I'm on the home ribbon in the center in the styles group, and there's a responsive layout. Okay. This actually lets me define somewhere, where to go. This actually lets me define how, here we go, how content should behave. Again, if I have 3 horizontal graphics and I want them to switch to a vertical format automatically. All right, so this may have been a longer answer than you had in mind. And if it was, my apologies. The point is, there's lots of parts in Flare that come into play to define what constitutes a different medium? And then how do you define, how do you design for each medium? Okay, Jennifer, did I talk
Great.
too much?
That's great. No, perfect. Thank you, Neil. Another interesting question came in. Could this feature be used to show or hide content based on a user login?
Okay, I'll give you two answers. The short answer is yes. The honest answer is yes, but it'll take a little work, because since this feature is reacting to states, user login would be a state. The only thing is, Flare, at least now, does not process based on user logins. But you could get your engineers to write the user login and connect that to Flare to control what content gets displayed, either by creating, let's say, 2 or 3 different Flare outputs, or by creating one Flare output and using this feature and tying the CSS to the user login through a JavaScript. So the short answer is yes.
Great. Could this, I thought this was a great question too, could this be linked to AI to give focused help for a user-specific situation? How much time do we have?
Whoever you are, I want to talk to you. Honest answer there is I don't know. But based on what I just said, that this is simply using the CSS and the JavaScript as a switching mechanism. I don't know if it could, but I can't see why it could not. And again, I will say that in the last slide, you have my contact information, including my email. And by the way, I will note that I realize this email is no longer accurate. This is my new email, and if you're wondering what kind of insane email this is, my old provider got bought out, and the new provider wants to brand their email, and I haven't gotten around to aliasing this back to something normal. But I would be happy to hear from you about that AI question. Feel free to write. Jennifer, back to you.
Great. Okay. I think we have time for just a couple more. This one I thought was interesting too. Maybe you could kind of rehash a little bit, but the question was the data stream coming from sensors. Where is it affecting Flare?
Yeah, question, where is the data stream affecting Flare? The data stream by itself is not. What happens is that the data stream gets intercepted by the JavaScript, which in turn writes some version of this. Now, this is the show CSS. So this is what's affecting Flare. All right, so again, the data stream does not directly affect Flare. The data stream gets it picked up by the JavaScript, which reads it and writes this. And then the documentation back in the browser gets refreshed. All right, if that made sense.
Great. I hope that was helpful. Thank you. And kind of to build on that, is there a way, or how do you link variables with the data?
Okay, whoever that was, I don't know. I haven't tried that yet, frankly. The problem with a variable is that, okay, take this answer with a grain of salt. The problem with a variable is that the variable value that's used gets used when you build the Flare output. So I don't believe it can get updated after the build like we did with the CSS. But you raise a good point, and I'm not sure of what I just said. So feel free to email me with that question, and I'll experiment, because it's an intriguing question and I don't know the answer.
Great. Just kind of tying into the meme, I think this could be our last one. And just remember, everyone, we will be sending out a question and answer document. So don't worry if we didn't get to yours, we will certainly follow up. But this is sort of a nice general one that came up a couple times. So these medium selections are for browsers on desktops, tablets, and phones. What is the mechanism for using it with a downloadable app for a tablet or a phone? Is it embedded, or do you use a runtime on those devices?
Okay, this field is, this whole concept is new enough that I find myself saying I'm not sure more often than I'd like, but this does give me some good homework. So the answer to that question is I'm not sure, but I will look into it.
Fair enough. Homework for you, Neil.
Fair enough.
All right, well, I'm looking at the time. We want to be respectful of everybody's day. I know we have so many wonderful attendees from all over the world, so I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And thank you, Neil. This was so informative. This is really interesting stuff, and I hope you all enjoyed it. So once again, we will be sending a link to everyone with the recording and a question and answer document. And again, we just want to thank everybody for coming, and we hope that you'll visit our site to see the upcoming webinars and training classes that we have. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Stay safe, everybody. Let's stay connected with each other. We will get through this, and we hope to see you all on another session. So thank you so much, and thank you so much, Neil, for this great presentation today.
My
Take care,
pleasure.
everybody.
Okay, thank you all.